Hello, and welcome to another live chapter reading by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Today's is The World Beyond the Walls, Natural Forces Series, Book 3 by Jean Gill. Evil lurks in the walls, they said. No one would listen to her, so why should she listen to them? If she was too young, too stupid, and a girl, then they were too old, too blind, and men. And so how could they see the truth that was so obvious to her? Arguing with herself, Jeanette hopped from one foot to the other in front of a stone wall in the gloomiest corner at the base of the spiral staircase in the Mage's Tower. She was really arguing with Nathan, who was not there. Usually he was unobjectable as a boy could be, and he was her only sure way of returning from an excursion into the walls, and he'd said no. His black spike of hair nodding in agreement, he'd responded to all her irresistible logic with one word, and she'd let him think he won. Her cheeks grew warm at the memory of his relief, his offer to help her in apprentice work in the forge, which he hated, or in binding her stories into books, which he hated even more. But she had not lied to him. She never said she wouldn't go. He'd just assumed she wouldn't dare go without him. And if he'd let her down, then she had no choice but to go alone, did she? The more she thought about it, the more she realized this was all Nathan's fault. He didn't appreciate how important her work was. He didn't appreciate her gift. He didn't appreciate her. He was just like the adult mages who still wouldn't allow girls into the walls. Now they'd even banned all apprentices from entering the walls unless under mages' orders, and then only one at a time in the company of Counselor Verity. She mimicked the pompous tones they used. Because evil lurks in the walls. Jeanette had seen Counselor Verity often enough, a girl barely older than her, as waif-like as Jeanette was solid, as pale-skinned and golden-haired as Jeanette was dark and haloed in frizz. The counselor didn't even have any magecraft, whereas Jeanette could levitate Nathan with just a thought beam. He objected to that, as did their tutor, Mage Smith Kerman. Said it was a very clever trick, but not respectful to a fellow mage. He could talk. Her teacher hadn't even looked at her story, however often she reminded him, and said how important it was. Jeanette didn't need any of them. She'd been into the walls before, and she could stand up for herself. She could balance on one leg, too. It helped her concentrate. The story. Telling stories was her special mage gift, just as Mage Kerman was a smith and a soul reader. But it was as if her gift was cursed. Nobody believed her stories mattered, and this one could shake the citadel to its foundation. Was that what she wanted? Oh yes, that was definitely what she wanted. When she'd snuck into the walls with Nathan, back when he'd been a true friend, she'd seen the honey hunter, and she'd known in her bones how important the girl was. And she'd known she had to go back to get the whole story. She'd imagined discussing the implications in council, being a hero for what she'd discovered. Instead, the story was laughing on a shelf, languishing on a shelf, read and dismissed. Or maybe not even read at all. Calm now, in the ageless certainty of her gift, Jeanette stepped forward and walked smoothly into the walls. A shaft of the light, and instead of stone walls, stairs, and darkness all around, she was now in a leafy green space. Not grassette, like in the Citadel, but real grass. Dozens of people ran, walked, played ball, and not one of them could see her, nor was she interested in them. Jeanette's paces were regular as her heartbeat. She walked through people as if they weren't real, or as if she wasn't. She shivered and continued to picture the honey hunter in her mind's eye until the scene shifted to a village in the mountains. The inhabitants outside their huts, watching a girl argue her cause. Kwan, long black hair, flashing eyes, and her father's two long bamboo spears in her hands. No woman had ever been a honey hunter, and at first the headman denied her passionate claim. She insisted that her dreams had named her the honey hunter, that her father's sacred role had been passed on to her when he died. Only when the village shaman spoke on her behalf was Kwan given the chance to prove herself worthy, as judged by the bees themselves. Jeanette's story lived and breathed in front of her. Kwan's team of 12 hunters carried bamboo ropes, slats of wood, and a wicker basket through the jungle across the leech-infested river to the sacred clearing above the high cliffs. When the men at the top lowered her down those sheer cliffs in a basket, Kwan was almost flying herself among the giant bees that streamed out to protect their comb. Vast, glistening slabs of their treasure filled every crevice in the rock face. Kwan's only protection was a veil around her head as she speared huge chunks of comb through black clouds of enraged insects, sent the severed pieces down the dizzying drop to the men waiting with baskets below. The rhododendron honey, so prized in the village, was its trading lifeblood. Men craved the heady rush, akin to madness, offered by a single teaspoonful. Those who risked a second helping learned of its dangers. As she swung in her basket amid smoke and bees, doubts and stings, Kwan was smacked in the face by a morsel of comb before it fell into the waiting basket below. She automatically licked her lips and then deliberately licked again. Kwan tasted the honey as she'd been warned not to do. Ha! Thought Jeanette, watching her story again. Someone like me. And what Kwan saw during the honey madness was what brought Jeanette back here. Not the boy and the kiss waiting in the village, not the celebration for the first woman honey hunter at the moment when she came back to the village victorious. In that honey-mad moment, swaying in a basket, dizzy from bee stings and vertigo, Kwan spoke to the bees, thanked them, and they replied. "We will need you," they told her. "Your hive and ours. Never forget our gifts." Through Kwan's eyes, Jeanette saw the smoke curl into the soft lines of a girl's face, surrounded by bees. The girl running through a forest, a tattoo glittering on her thigh. A queen bee coming alive, flying. "Never forget," the bees buzzed. "We protect our queen. We protect you." Born and bred in the citadel, like generations before her, Jeanette had never seen living beings that weren't human until she'd made her illicit trip with Nathan into the walls. She knew of such creatures from books in the library and had been brought up to give thanks they'd been exterminated. The citadel was indeed free of infestation, but rumor populated the nearby forest with all manner of monster, including the defectives in exile from the citadel. Like every citizen, Jeanette had heard the terrifying story of the citadel freak who'd been infected with forest, who communed with bees, could even become one, and who'd been defeated. The stones be thanked, in the battle of the forest, where she now lived in exile. And then, in the mysterious world through the walls, where the past existed in layers of time, Jeanette had found the honey hunter and the bees. What if? Jeanette had asked herself ever since she shared Kwan's vision through smoke and the blackness of bees. What if the vision had come to pass? What if the girl running through the forest was the citadel's enemy, the queen of the warrior bees? Conquered but alive, she was held as a threat over naughty children by citadel parents. Bees instead of hair, black eyes filling her face. She'll take you off to the forest if you don't behave, and if you don't obey her every wish, she'll have you stung until you're more full of holes than a hairnet. Not that Jeanette ever believed such stories anymore. Given the number of times she'd misbehaved, she should have been whisked off to the forest long ago. What if this is where it began? This communion with bees, a promise, a prophecy. Were Kwan and the boy who loved her parents to the freak? And if the running girl was the queen of the warrior bees, Jeanette knew something about her that would end her reign. Their queen would not be protected, however many bees were with her, if she was suppressed before her life began here in the walls. First, Jeanette had to follow the story, find out how it led from here to the citadel side of the wall. Then she could go to the Council of 10 and impress them. Mage Smith Kerman would be sorry he hadn't taken her stories seriously. Show me the honey hunter returning with her harvest, she instructed, and in the manner of the world within the walls, her focus created a destination, and the scene shifted around her until she was once more among the huts of the village, watching Juan, lauded by the headman, returning triumphant with her 2 spears and precious baskets of mad honey. By refining her search terms, she navigated the stages of Juan's life, willing time to pass ever faster, so she watched only key scenes. She saw Juan and her young man grow older, their children playing hunt the honey with wooden sticks, until the year came where one of the boys knelt in front of the headman and received his mother's spears as pride lit her eyes. Not a girl child, thought Jeanette, and the other children showed no interest in bees, so the running girl was still in the future. Jeanette must walk through time, following the story of the bee's promise. Once she was on the scent of a story, she was oblivious to all else, and she was happy on the honey trail. But her presence in the walls had not gone unnoticed, and a great evil awoke. Finally, its time had come, and it laughed. Chapter 2. Jeanette watched Quan's family through the span of 6 generations of honey hunters, 4 replacements of spears, and in the village a multiplication of huts with new tin roofs. The bees' words to Quan were passed on with due reverence to each subsequent generation. 1,000 stories of lives lived well or badly, sometimes both, flickered past Jeanette, but as far as she was concerned, she was witnessing a jungle, cliffs, and a village where nothing happened. Boredom whined. How much longer? 1 more generation, she told herself. Just 1 more, then I'll go home. But her concentration on the honey hunters had been interrupted long enough for more than boredom to pose questions. 1 more generation. The word shocked her. How long had she been here in Citadel time watching? Nathan had relayed all the warnings the boys had been given. How easy it is to follow one distraction after another, gorging on the rich sensations of past lives, forgetting to nourish the Citadel body, and staying too long in this seductive world. What happened if you stayed too long? Jeanette's throat went dry, and her empty stomach rumbled. That's just boys' talk, she told herself, like frightening small children with the queen of the warrior bees. And now she'd seen bees through the mind of a honey hunter. They weren't so frightening at all, if you treated them with respect. She ignored the inner voice reminding her that the boys had been given all this information because they were allowed to go into the walls. They were trained, and she wasn't. 1 more generation, she repeated sternly, and at that moment, 2 things happened. The first was that a stranger walked into the village, a craggy-faced man in dark trousers and jacket, out of place beside the tribesmen in their colorful wrappings. Jeanette felt the tingle she'd known when she first saw Quan. The man was not alone. Behind him were tribal bearers, carrying packs on their heads, and behind them were 3 more men in suits. The outsiders were panting and red-faced from the rugged trek up the mountain to reach the village. As was proper, a villager fetched the headman, who kept the visitors waiting long enough to establish his importance. Then he came out of the largest hut wearing his ceremonial headdress, always worn when he appointed the new honey hunter. In 7 generations of honey hunters, Jeanette had seen 5 headmen and 9 changes of headdress. This one consisted of bright feathers and beaded tresses. The headman pointed to the stranger's leader to indicate permission to speak. You speak traitor language? The headman nodded. I am Oliver DuPont, and we have traveled far, seeking your honey hunter, said the stranger's leader, as Jeanette had known he would. Her story was unfolding.